I Unplugged News,
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
I Unplugged News. I Unplugged News.
Where you get our cultural news. I Unplugged News is coming to you in.
Welcome to I Unplugged News. Greetings and welcome to I Unplugged News. Greetings and countless felicitations. We just want to thank you for coming by and sharing time with us and being a part of our I Unplugged family. Tonight we've got special guests here. We have two special guests here. Normally we just have one guest. So this is our first time having two guests, and they are getting ready to they getting ready to bring it home. I'm telling you. So I hope you all are ready because this thing is getting ready to pop off now. So basically, we've got uh, our brother Tahuti and we have our brother Sundiata here, uh, both serious about our community on the West Coast. And I'm telling you, they're doing some wonderful work. Doing work in Africa. They're doing so many things. But tonight we're going to focus on Brown versus the Board of Education, and this is a really serious subject. And there's some things that we all in the community need to pay attention to. We're not realizing that this is still affecting us today, and so we want to bring you the message so that we can all stay cognizant and so that we can begin to tapestrate where we want to go from here. This is it's going to be really important, the things that we do from this point on. So we thank you again. And with that being said, we're going to bring on dear brother Tahuti, who is one of the educators in our community, pretty well known. Most people know who he is. And Brother Tahuti is really spearheading this project uh, to interrupt. We want a proper disruption in terms of how our schools are affected, how our communities then are affected, and legally what we may not be aware of, things that are going on. We need to also be aware of how schools are operating. So, Brother Tahuti, would you tell our audience a little bit about who you? Hey, Brother Tahuti, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for asking. It's good to see you.
You too.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Will you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? Just who you are, where you live, and what your just in general your concerns are with Brown versus education. Uh, just a small tidbit.
Okay, yeah. I was born here in this area, and I currently reside in Inglewood. I teach in that. I was been an educational activist for as far as I can remember, at least over 30, 34, 35 years now. I was educated in this community, but I think I really got my education outside of the formal system. Once I started finding out about our people in history and all of the great things. So I went to down south to go to school. I went to Grambling in search of, and I also was able to discover some of the hindrances that on each other in terms of our enlightenment. And I actually was not into education per se. I was more of going to like everyone else, trying to make the money, marketing, music, sports, the whole thing. But I was always a natural as far as education. Always drew me in as just a natural, teacher. So basically, in the forefront of independent Black schools, I taught in independent Black schools. I also in public school, and uh, I was recruited to do special Black boys out. So I've done that for the past, say, 20 years. So that's a little background.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you. Yep. Hmm. Of course. All right. Well, second generation educator in Los Angeles. Parents have one of the oldest independent Black schools in Los Angeles. And I went to Howard University as political science major, economics minor. Tahuti and I were involved in an organization called the Mata years ago. Rest in peace, the founder, Al and Kenneth. So we were involved in that. Go ahead, Tahuti, you want to say? And
No,
then
Ken Bridges.
Ken Bridges, Al Wellington, very dynamic group. And then we were involved in different organizations and attended lectures and reading and studied together. Tootie also, we were had the pleasure of knowing our brother Earl Grant, who just made his transition to who he was his caregiver for 20 years. His right hand man to Malcolm X. He taught us a lot about who we are as a people and where we should go. We've just been activists in Los Angeles and, like you said, around the world. We're currently involved in organizations that touch Africa and in Ghana and Nigeria. And so we just have interest to uplift our people and to do all we can to continue the struggle and continue the win that we know eventually is going to come. So that's what we are. Mm-hmm. All right.
talking about between 1866 and 1930.
Yeah,
Foundational.
roughly, yeah, roughly speaking. I think, and then a little bit before that, Tahuti, I guess you could elaborate on us in terms of struggle during our enslavement, how people stowed away and free Africans would risk their life and their freedom. And go ahead,
Right.
Tahuti, elaborate on that real quick.
Well, yeah, as you just alluded to, literacy was forbidden because it's always been an effort to control a people. You must control their minds. So they didn't want enlightenment to enter. One Virginia planner said that they took every step or every light from entering into so-called slaves' minds. So again, for a slave to read was to have their forefinger chopped off, forefinger, if they were caught learning. So that's the premise that began our drive. Even in those situations, we had what was called hush harbor meetings, as well as what was called stealing a meeting, where the free blacks would sneak in onto the plantations and hold schools by torch. And so this is during slavery. Now this is so-called emancipation, and then after that period, about 18 was created. They had schools established under that, but even in that, they had schools prior called Sabbath schools, and these schools were established, as Sunday schools. However, they were schools during the week at night as well. And these actually in 1866, when the Freedmen Bureau's first report by a man named Alford was reported, you had at least 500 of these schools throughout the South. So that means they exist prior. And they actually were doing it under that. But the first order, say, from the government, a military order, and that happened August 29th, 1863, name of Banks, and then they followed up one in February 3rd of 1864. The first impetus towards educating our people formally.
I want to piggyback on that a little bit. Earl taught us that free blacks in New York established middle schools for black children in around the 1850s, and they actually were outperforming white middle schools in tests and in their results. We're talking about 1850s. We're talking about a good 10 to 15 years before the so-called emancipation of us as physically.
That's right. Those were eighth grade students that were outscoring. And by the way, education, it as an eighth grade student, they were scholars compared to what we have. But moving forward, there were always efforts to privately own education by our people. We were double taxed. We were only making, at the dawn of Reconstruction, and during that period, we were only estimated as having about really less than 1% of the nation's wealth. Yet of the black schools, there were 44% privately owned by blacks. So we always had the impetus for education and wanting to education. You had life savings towards educating. We had what is called the Snuff Box Brigade, which around with snuff box to gather funds for building schools, and we built these schools. Now, philanthropy from what is called a Rosenwald Fund, and he was an executive with Sears and Roebuck, and he would come and match funds, but the funds he matched was only 10%. 90% of the funds came from the black community, although he got credited with building all these schools built by blacks. And later on, black schools had to deed their land over to the state in order to receive funding. And when they received those funding were diverted later to the white schools, which is what came about with the separate but equal doctrine, say Plessy versus Ferguson. And so when that came about, you had they were saying that it was constitutionally okay for them to have separate schools, uh, but they were supposed to be equal. But all the funding went to the white schools.
Right.
So we're seeing, I'm we're seeing how this thing sinks so fast. So we're going to take the time out to say we are also on Clubhouse. If you're on here on Clubhouse with us, we just want to welcome you. We are also broadcasting live on I Am Plug News. We'd love for you to ping some of your people in the room so that we can be speaking to multitudes of people on both platforms. So if you could take the time right now to ping some people, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to take some time to ping a couple people too. So with that being said, we are right about around the space where we're looking at, again, the independent schools versus the state-sponsored white philanthropic agenda.
Right.
Okay. So, take your time, but are we going into the landmark case at this point? In terms, I heard you mention Plessy versus Ferguson. So,
Well, that was around 1890. It was kind of it kind of capped a whole decade or so of the reversal of Reconstruction, because if you remember, Reconstruction is when we had a black control over the South, because our sheer numbers allowed us to vote in different senators and mayors and so forth. So after Civil War, the South was devastated. Black people had the numbers. We had military troops down there who were our black soldiers who were veterans of the Civil War, and they were protecting the black vote and the black politicians. So they had they really implemented a lot of laws that still stand on the books to this day, and they ran an effective government in the South. But then we have Rutherford B. Hayes and Tillman who came together, and one had the popular vote, and the other one had the electoral vote. And so what happened, and it's a lesson that we haven't learned to this day, is that whites came together and said, instead of tearing the Union apart, we will put this on the backs of blacks and we would betray them. So the Republican Party, who was then the party of black people, betrayed us and made a deal with the Democratic Party and said, look, you will give us the presidency and we will hand you back the South. And when they hand back the South, then you had this oppressive regime. You took those black soldiers out the South, you sent them out west and hunted the last remaining Native Americans. We call those the Buffalo Soldiers, but really that was a con game to really to move black soldiers out, and they applaud them for going and chasing Native Americans around America, while black people were left unprotected and we were killed and slaughtered. And so what you had then was a movement against any kind of black independence. And when you had this movement against black independence, you also had a movement against our black institutions, as always is the case. And so Plessy versus Ferguson, by the time that came about in Louisiana, it was the capstone. It gave the Supreme Court justice the legal authority to say, yes, this is going to be two Americas, and it's going to be separate and equal, although we know that's unequal, because they were going to take, like Tootie said, the resources from us and feed into their own institutions while trying to starve our institutions. But we were resilient people. This, when you saw the upsurge of all these independent towns over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and then we were very independent people. We still had our successes. And so what you saw was all these independent schools being built by black people when we were left alone. And just briefly, I'm going to bring up the Dunbar School. It's called the M Street School, Washington, D.C. It was one of the best high schools for black people in the country. Black people would actually move to Washington, D.C. just to enroll their children into the school. And at this school, you have people with PhDs who were teaching there. You had teachers who could have been anywhere in America, but could not be because of this separation, and they were forced to be in our classroom with our children, and they created outstanding students. Like Tahuti said, we do not know scholarship to this day like they knew back then. Those students were equivalent of college graduates by the time they finished with the M Street School, which later became the Dunbar School, and it still exists here. Still exists in Washington, D.C. It was an excellent school. That, among many others, you had the school that Martin Luther King graduated from. I believe it was Frederick Douglass School in Atlanta. It was an excellent school. So across the country, you have black people who turned inward and built a dynamic institutions which frightened white people, that we know of. So that coming up to the Red Summer, and to who do you can fill in what you feel I may be leaving out, but that coming into the Red Summer of 1919 and 1920s, you saw black people really establishing on their own through the neglect of the United States. Black people establishing on their own what whites would eventually come to fear. So
And it's very important because um Sundiata just said, we had these schools and we had to sacrifice for education. We were double taxed in this period that he's speaking of, around 1920, in the former slave holding states in the South. Only 64 high schools for blacks during that time. And also there was around 2 million or so school age children. However, there was only 27,000 teachers, black teachers, to teach them. And although there were that many, only about a third of those students actually attended school because of the labor. They would have them on these same plantations, and then the planting season is the reason why we're everything else even constructed today. It has to do with around the time that the students, and so when we were moving towards educating and enlightenment from 1865 or 1860, say 1866 to 1930, we did the greatest literacy advancement in the history of the world. We went from 0% literacy to 80% literacy. Now, this is despite not having the resources. This is despite having leaky roofs. This is despite having to write with charcoal in the ground sometimes. Despite all of these, because the main thing is the expectation that the children can learn and the example that they learn from their own people. And that came out even in recent study, United Nations study, which corroborated that very point. So this movement moves us closer to the time of Brown. When we're getting close to Brown, it was an issue of resources more so than actual quality, because the quality was unmatched. In fact, even today, you do not have school systems that's failing black children today. It still does. So success is when we've educated our own. But Sundiata, you can go ahead and just talk a little bit about that aspect leading up to the decisions that were being made. A little bit about Charles Hamilton Houston first. He was the architect for the dismantling of Jim Crow. Now that's different than integration. He wanted to dismantle Jim Crow, which said we got to take the control away from them keeping us separate, because we have access. We need access to resources. We need to be having whatever we need in terms of where we can go freely in the country and not be. That's different than integration. So Sundiata, you can go ahead.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that we always parade the bunch of pioneers and inventors that we've created in the past, but not understanding those inventors had come out of those one-room schoolhouses. That those inventors were the ones that are being nurtured by black educators. And then we look back about how much success we had in creating, like, the first car company, for instance, and and creating, of course, the light filament and so forth. And these people were all educated by black people. So we applaud on one end the student, but we forget the mechanism that created the student. And like I said before, when you start creating those independent towns, such as the Tulsas, such as the Haiti community in Wilmington, North Carolina, and the Rosewood communities, when you have these black people who turn inward once again, and they perform excellent as a community, then you saw whites and outside who feared this and said, no, this is a problem. So what they came up with was somewhat ingenious, but definitely evil. And that is the fact that they were going to give us what we claimed that we wanted. And like someone says, when they give you what you want, they give it to you with a vengeance. And that is going to be the integration that they crafted and gave to us. And we're going to see this when we break down the Brown versus Board of Education. What this has been is it been a misinformation campaign on the part of the United States government. It has been something that's foisted upon us and made to think that this is what our ancestors wanted, was the fact that we needed to sit next to white children to be smart, that we needed white teachers to be smart, when all the historical data shows that we were doing fine when we had our own funds and our own resources. As a matter of fact, one of the cases that came about fighting school, let's say, inequalities was in San Antonio, when black parents were upset because their tax dollars were being taken and put on the white side of town and not being given to their own children. So white said, okay, we're going to solve that. We're going to solve that by giving you integration. And what you'll see is that then black dollars really left our communities when what we call ADA, average daily attendance, where so therefore white districts were able to pick up cherry pick those black students and take the resources from those black students while not educating them at the same time. We're going to get into that when we start talking about Thurgood Marshall, the so-called the myth surrounding Thurgood Marshall. As a matter of fact, Tootie has a great quote from W.B. Du Bois. Tootie, share that quote we have of Thurgood Marshall with the community.
Oh yeah, he said the great W.E.B. Du Bois said that Thurgood Marshall knew a lot about law, but he knew very little about black people. So in other words, he was saying,
Long
you
on
know,
the law.
he's long on the law, but short on black people. That was the quote.
Exactly. And so what you saw was that the United States realizing, also let's take the international scope, because that's one thing that we don't do. Internationally, at this time versus Brown versus Board of Education at the Bandung Conference in 1955, I believe, when the Indonesian countries, about 29 of them, came together and said, let's not be one way or the other. Let's not be for the communists or for the so-called West. Let's stay independent, but let's stay as a pack, because what we are against is colonization. So the United States was battling the Soviet Union for the hearts and minds of the people around the world. So they needed certain winds to come out of the United States to make them look like they were for people who are non-white. And part of those wins was going to be Brown versus Board of Education, because then they could use that as a banner and go to these other countries, which they wanted their resources, and say, look at what we did for black people. Because you have to remember, around this time, you had so much racial violence and terrorism. We have Emmett Till that would come about. You had the killing of black children that were coming about. You had the lynchings that were coming out of America. That America was having a hard time going to black and brown and yellow countries and saying that we are not racist. We're better than the Soviet Union. And those countries could point to America and say, no, you're not. So you had this need for propaganda to show the world that a white American democracy was somehow beneficial for non-white people. And so when you had Brown versus Board of Education, it was very important. And as a matter of fact, we can look at the Supreme Court Justice Warren, who just a few years earlier put Japanese in concentration camps. Now, this is a man that we're supposed to believe that was so liberal and loved humanity so much that he would jump from putting people in the concentration camps to also to all of a sudden viewing integration as the model that America should follow. No, that wasn't the case. They had already planned what they were going to do with Brown versus Board of Education.
Right. And it's important, sister, that we make this point, because it didn't happen in a vacuum. It's a pattern. If you go back to what's being discussed currently in the political, in Congress and in the political arena, is the 3/5 compromise. They're talking about that on the floor and about how it was beneficial and all. Back to why we were brought here. We were brought here to make white people wealthy. We were brought here for them to benefit from our labor, for them to benefit from our efforts. The 3/5 compromise is the crystallization of that. We had our bodies were counted, but we had no say so, no power, no resources. And it's the same thing in education. That Suliata talked about is the resources are counted. Your bodies are counted, but then our children are tracked into lower track. They're suspended at higher rates than any other one, and we talked about the different aspects, which we'll get into when we talk about the post Brown. Um, it- but leading up to that, we were looking for, again, resources. We can't emphasize that much. And in the environment, the only thing that they were dealing with was the threat to their economic advancement of the markets around the world. Because with the imagery of the savage treatment of our people, our ancestors, the world on them. The world was frowning, and it was a different situation. So what we must does this game plan keep working? How does it keep resurfacing out? And why don't we recognize this same game and continue to trust those who are untrustworthy?
That's right.
What Sundiata talked about with Earl Warren, the Chief Justice, that was you can throw a rock during the time that it took from those internment camps to the decision on Brown, and there's no way that this man's mindset has changed. But again, we're so longing for appreciation. We're so longing for that we jump in, and it's an African proverb that says, "Only a fool tests the with both feet." And see, we've constantly jumped in with both feet, and at least at least sticking your toe in first or your leg in first to check out
Right.
danger instead of just going for it all the time.
That's right. And in Brown versus Board of Education, what you had was the NAACP was looking for a case to integrate the schools. And what it came across was Oliver Brown, whose daughter was going across town, crossing two busy streets and catching a bus, taking her close to an hour to get to school when there was a school closer to them, right. So really, the Brown family wanted proximity. They felt like, look, even though this black school is a good school, jeopardizing her health and her well-being by having to get on this bus and walk across these two streets. So therefore, it wasn't not a question of, it was a question of proximity. It was the fact that the school closest to them, they should have, by being a citizen, have the right to go to them. And they themselves would say this in interviews that we actually love the black school with the great teachers, want to go to the school closest to us. So what the issue we have, or the issue that we need to look at and really pay attention to, is why did Thurgood Marshall paint the picture that we had inferior schools? He called them inherently inferior. This label of inherently inferior black institutions was devastating to the black mindset because it fed into the white supremacy mindset that their stuff is better than ours. And that's why they enjoyed the argument so much. That's why they love the narrative of Brown versus Board of Education, because through it, it says that you all cannot educate your children, that you need us to educate your children. And as a matter of fact, in Topeka, Kansas, the black population was 60% of them wanted to keep their own schools. They did not want integration. 60% of them said, do not close our schools. And then also they used the Kenneth Clark test. Or he had this test he did with black children. He presented them with a black doll and a white doll, and they were showing that because these black children were picking white dolls over and over, somehow they came to the conclusion that because they were picking white dolls over and over, it's the black schools that were hurting their confidence. It made no sense whatsoever. So their conclusion was, let's put them in front of white teachers since they're picking white dolls, and somehow this will change the fact that they're picking white dolls. These are actually what he used as an example to prove the inherent or the inferiority complex that black children were having by going to underfunded black schools. It made no sense whatsoever. No sense. And the irony of it all is, after Brown versus Board of Education, that was an argument about proximity. The 70s really is when it all kicked off, when it gave it funding and stuff. The irony of it all, black children were put on buses after the 70s and driven an hour and a half away from their communities to go to other people's schools, when all the while this was supposed to be about proximity. It became about inferiority. And this is what the issue, one of the big issues that we have with Brown versus Board of Education. But not only that, But the bigger issue, and Tootie's going to get on this even more with his statistics, is the fact that we took black teachers and we fired them wholesale. 1 year after Brown versus Board of Education, we lost 35 to 55% of our teachers. Now, listen closely. In the 1950s, when white people had no problem killing Emmett Tills and watching lynchings going up across the country, we somehow felt it was better to fire black teachers and place black children in the hands of known racist teachers or unknown racist teachers. It made no sense.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have this push to fire black teachers and black principals and put them in the hands of white teachers. Matter of fact, there was a sister, Naomi Brooks. She had a
Mhm.
PhD in Mobley, Missouri. They fired her and all the other 6 teachers, black teachers, and they even kept white teachers who weren't even fully licensed to teach. And she actually sued. She said, "How are you going to fire us based on race when Brown versus Board of Education was supposed to be race?" This showed the game that they had played, they had tricked. But Tootie's got some great statistics on really how devastating the firing of this whole strong group of professionals was on the black community.
All right,
Yeah,
so
when you
what we're
look,
going to do is we're going to go to commercial break,
Okay.
okay,
and then we're going to come back and have Tahuti talk to us about what was going on in terms of this firing and hiring, and how it was affecting our children and our school systems. We'll be
okay.
back in just a moment.
I Unplugged News,
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
I Unplugged News. I Unplugged News.
Where you get our cultural news. I Unplugged News is coming to you in
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
All over the world.
I Unplugged News,
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
I Unplugged News. I Unplugged News.
Where you get our cultural news. I Unplugged News is coming to you in
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
All over the world.
Welcome back to I Unplugged News. I Unplugged family. We're on Clubhouse and we're here at I Unplugged News. If you'd like to be on I Unplugged News with us, I'd like for you to dial 614-260-6553. If you'd like to be on I Unplugged News, all you have to do is text 614, only text, no calls, 614-260-6553. And we'll get you in. We'll send you a link and you can come in because I'm telling you, they are burning it up in here. We have with us Brother Tahuti and Brother Sundiata, and they are currently working on a project that is going to be established by the foundational staples of what our community has looked like over the many years and the struggle. And you can see this all laid out, beginning with the Brown versus Board of Education case, and they are laying it out now. We are now talking about the teacher situation and what was happening as they were laying black teachers off, and they were hiring white teachers. And we're going to go into that. Sundiata is going to pick up. Brother Sundiata, y'all burning it up. Jehudi's going to pick up, excuse me. Y'all are really, really bringing it in. And I thank you because this is powerful information that our people really need to hear. All right. So,
Right.
Brother Jehudi, if you can go ahead and take off from here.
Okay, no problem. We have to look at where we were at this decision. Okay, during say 1954, there was approximately 82,000 black teachers. Immediately after, that number went down to around 4 black teachers. So about half of them were eliminated. The teachers were making 25 to 34% less white counterparts who had less qualifications. Now, when we moved, teachers made up about 50% of the professional class of our people, nationally. So you not only were affecting the education, but you was affecting the economic development of the community. So when we look at the in terms of the principals, 90% of the principals lost their position. So give an example in North Carolina, 620 principals across about 100 or so districts, I believe it was, but it was 620 principals, and that number went down to 40 in 4 years.
Wow.
Another example in Arkansas, on the dawn of 19 to 1968, virtually no black teachers were hired. They had a pipeline, again, benefiting off of the bodies of black children, educating, oppressing, destroying their self-esteem, and an expectation that they would be successful and learn. And that is the most important part of education, is the teacher's expectations that the student can learn. And they did studies on that where they showed that upwards of 84% of white teachers believe that black students at the time could go to college or had the ability to do higher learning. And that's very important too. Also, another statistic is that there was about 84% of teachers were white, and there were only 61% white students. And conversely, there was about 18% students that were black and 7% black teachers. So in other words, we're missing over 11% of teachers, and that translated into current times about $1 trillion in the economy for generations. Missing about 352,000 black teachers across that. Now, if you go a little, if you look at Sundiata and myself, we're African American males. We 2% of teachers, and it's an experience that our children do not receive often. So when we look at these statistics and we ask ourselves, what did we give up? Well, we gave up an economy. We gave up our professional class, eliminating 25% of the professional class because 50% of them were teachers. We eliminated a generation of black teachers who would produce other students who want to emulate them and continue to teach students, but it became such a burden and struggle that it was not a profession that our college graduates wanted to go into because it wasn't lucrative, and everyone um, has the passion, but the resources being diverted back to our community and keep that professional class to a level of respect that it should be, and that's how low teacher salaries are today. Um, and like I said, up to $1 trillion in teachers' salaries and benefit are missing from Black families since 1954.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, and we're talking about our community, we're talking about the steadfast staple in our community is always centered around the schools. The school is an economic engine. Professor Grant, who Sunyata talked to you about earlier, our mentor, taught us that, a school is an economic engine. You have contracts. Custodial staff wasn't getting those contracts. You have painters, you have gardeners, you have plumbers, you have all of these different contracts. They'll let you work, but they will not let you be the owner of the business that makes the contract. And see, these things constantly drained our. And so when you sit around and turn around, and you can reflect that into the activities that some of our youth find themselves in, not being able to be employed, and unemployment rates. You can reflect that into the so-called activity that they call gang activity. You can reflect that into all these things. These are the impact of removing these teachers and removing that example. They had an example of a teacher named Miss Jones, where she would make her students come into the classroom, shoes shine, cleaned, and then she would drive her, I think I said a white Pontiac, up and down the street looking for them, even after hours. And if she caught them, they were getting in trouble when they got home if they were hanging out and doing other things. That's the type of teachers that we had that were removed.
I want to give just a personal anecdote. My mother taught in the Compton School District, and one of her teachers was by the name of Eric Wright, who eventually became Easy E. And she always told the story of how she went over his house to try and talk to his mother, and he came to the door with a wig on and a robe, saying, "Oh, was Eric a bad boy today?" But these are the kind of things that black teachers were doing in Compton when they were integrating Compton back in the late 50s and early 60s. But then you also have to look at the fact that the reason why they kept black males out of teaching was they created these tests for black teachers. It was also a war on black teaching. You had to pass tests to become a teacher. And some of those tests early on were very crude tests. Before Brown versus Board of Education, when we talk about 1890s, the turn of the century, some of those tests were just how many peas are in this bottle, So there were tests that you could not pass. Because you have to remember, after the end of the Civil War, you had Confederate soldiers who were fighting to keep blacks in slavery. They actually were signing up to become teachers because it was about an occupation. And black parents were so upset with them, they said, because they keep calling our children the N-word in the classroom. This was about economics. And they were able to shape it and pattern it in such a way that we would cheer for our own cutting of our own throat. There's an African proverb that said, the monkey copying everybody else eventually cuts his own throat. And we see this with the handling of Thurgood Marshall's legacy. Thurgood Marshall, played by the great Chadwick Boseman, was seen as a hero. But yet here was a man who was reporting to the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. Now you take the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. They took a 17-year-old child who was warred upon by the state of the United States and made him out to be a Judas when he didn't even meet J. Edgar Hoover. And yet they take Thurgood Marshall, who met with J. Edgar Hoover, told on Martin Luther King and a man named Robert F. Williams, who we'll talk about later. He told on so-called the communists to the FBI. He participated in what the youth call snitching, and yet they create him a movie where he is a hero. Because why? Because he delivered to them in a package the black bodies of our children, the black minds of our children. And if you have to look at also to Hootie will get in this further because he does great work in this when it comes to special education. You start talking about the tracking. So what all black people in the sound of my voice will tell you that they all have experienced going into a school and sitting down with a counselor who told them, you're not ready for algebra. We want you to take this remedial class or this basic math class. All black people can give you the experience of going into the school and having to fight for quality education. So what they did was they practiced segregation within integrated environments. They took the funds from the city. They used them to educate the white and Asian children, and those black and brown children were put into remedial classes. We call it tracking. They would track you, and as soon as they started tracking you, as soon as you graduated, you were no longer fit to do those marvelous things that your ancestors had done just a generation or two earlier, and that is create these wonderful inventions when it came to science and math. So it was a plan. It was a plan when they said, okay, we'll integrate these schools, but what we'll do is when we get them, we will shortchange them in terms of their learning. And also, if you go to any class to this day, if you go to any class, you will see black boys sitting in the back of the class being ignored or picked upon. As a matter of fact, because of Zoom, we've seen a number of instances where black children were made to feel inferior and given negative connotations in terms
Academic,
of academics.
yeah,
These teachers were basically.
accosted.
I personally have a friend who was listening to his son's Zoom class, and the teacher was picking on him as though he was a problem in the classroom, and he wasn't. He had to change teachers. But this is what happened when we turn our children over, and this is the sad part. We're talking about policing in the street, but no one's talking about teaching in the classroom. We
Right.
know CNN had a statistic, and it said that a black baby is 3 times more likely. I'm gonna say it slower. A black child, a black baby, is 3 times more likely to die at the hands of a white doctor. A black child is 3 times more likely to die at the hands of a white doctor. If that is the case, where does a black child stand in front of a white teacher? If this is
Exactly.
CNN, these are white papers that are telling you that they'll kill you,
And more
what they'll do to
and
you.
right, and more so to that, even if it's not, unfortunately, a white teacher, what about the white mindset that
Exactly.
that is carried forward of superiority and inferiority? And when you look, we're going into post Brown. When you look at it, we came up during that busing, and
Yes.
we experienced it firsthand. I remember sitting in front of and having my hand ignored, knowing the answer, and they said you have to give the other white children a chance. I said they had the same chance that I did. They were sitting in the same classroom as I was. And I also remember later on, after getting to high school and being an athlete, and I could have even left school after my first semester of my senior year, but I stayed. Got AP classes. They didn't tell me about AP classes. In fact, some of my friends that had classes, I was helping them and doing their homework for them, and they were going to get tracked to like university, and I was just taking the regular classroom, even though regular classes, even though I could do higher level work. But see, these are the type of things when our counselors are sitting there and have low expectations for our children. They won't inspire. They won't even have resources again, scholarships again, all of these things available. They're not even getting introduced to these decisions that we make. They say some people will come with what we call numbers, which is when you see, oh, we have more college graduates, but we don't have more college graduates that are literate. We have more PhDs, but we don't have PhDs that's doing anything of service to the community. Oh, well, we have, the income level has rise, but in terms of the percentage of the wealth of the nation, it has not. And so when we look at these things over and over again, you can't call yourself educated, because educated people solve their own problems. And by this decision, Brown versus Board of Education, no one can show me where that has solved a problem that is significant to the African. I haven't seen a significant problem solved yet. We're still fighting against the same reality. We're still dealing with the same unemployment. We're still dealing with the same dependence we dealt, from the beginning. So if we're still in this dependent state, what is keeping us there? If it's not the education, if it's not the training, if it's not the program, like we talk about it, but we don't do anything about it. We talk about prison, the pipeline, but what are we doing about that? They're testing in the 3rd grade, and they build prisons based on those test scores to that point that the likelihood is 75%. 75%. So if we're seeing these statistics, we have to come up with a program to take back the minds of our children and then demand our resources. All we need is our resources. We've done it. 80%, like I said, 1966, 1935, 80% literacy from zero. So if anybody has a formula for success for Black children, it's Black.
That's right.
And they know this. So this is why our numbers are diminishing. Go ahead.
That's right. And I would say another thing, you talk about that pipeline. There's also a pipeline to black on black crime, because
That's right.
like Dr. Bobby Wright pointed out, that mental side, the inferiority complex, when you were able to successfully argue before the Supreme Court that Black schools were inherently inferior, this is when we get the mindset of Black children calling anything Black ghetto. If you talk to a Black business, that's ghetto. If he sees a Black school, that's a ghetto school. If he sees Black merchandise, I don't want that merchandise. I want Louis and Gucci, because those are white, they're superior. I don't want the inferior product. What we didn't realize, what we gave to our children was inferiority complex within its end, like menticide, in its is going to be the killing of a Black male and another Black male, because he sees that Black male as the enemy, because he was seen as the enemy. If we look at somebody like a Nipsey Hussle, accurately said that when I went out to do my thing at night as a gangbanger, I looked for an image that looked like me. And that's very significant, because what happens is in the classroom, when we destroy these Black youth, all they have to catch them is the street. And like Tahuti says, I too have the personal experience of playing sports and coming early to school and getting an algebra class and having a white counselor tell me that, no, that class is full. I want you to go check out the high school math class. And I'm like, why you want to check out the high school math class? He said, just take a look at it. When I went down there, all my friends were there, sitting on the desk, almost hanging off the chandeliers, talking about, this is great, we have to do no math, come on in. What they didn't tell you is after 2 semesters of taking math, you had satisfied the requirement to graduate from high school, but you satisfy the A through G courses to get into a UCLA or USC. So this was a game they were playing. I didn't go to class for the next 2 weeks. He had to put me in algebra class, and but his plan was to do me like they were doing the rest of the Black students. So this is very serious when we talk about we have to wake our parents and our people up. And a lot of older generations can tell you what life was like when they lived in a community where the institutions cared about them. And I think that's important also, And we come up with a game plan. I guess we'll speak about it a little bit later, but a game plan to where we have to really take a look at these school boards and start looking at the age of charter school, which is a whole nother animal. Now let's think about this. They told us to take our children out of our school, put them into their schools. Now, years later, they're telling us their schools are failing, and they've come out with a new concept called charter schools. These are the same people who told us to come to their schools, and they're telling us, oh, no, these schools don't work. We got a whole special another program called charter schools. Put them over here. That is ridiculous. And we know the problems with charter schools is that these foundations that were there earlier, that we talk about, the Rosenwald Fund and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. These are the foundations that are setting up the charter schools. It's still about the trillions of dollars that goes to education. We talk about defunding the police, but you have to look at the funding that goes on into schools and how these foundations are setting it up where they receive all the money, and they once again keep tracking our children. Slaves are irrelevant. This is one of the reasons why when you go to these schools, like my son went to Howard University, half the doctors or the pre-med students at Howard University were Nigerian. Why were they Nigerian? Because in Nigeria, they don't have whites giving them Brown versus the Board of Education. Now, the sad part is and I can show you outside of UCLA and USC, Chinese students come from an all Chinese school in China and walk right by a black boy who went to integrated school and go into USC and UCLA. I can show you an Indian child who went to an all Indian school in India and walk right by black children and other children who went to integrated school, and yet they'll go in and take engineering. Now, why is the segregation not bad for them? It's supposed to be bad for us. It's ridiculous. And we have to get out of this mindset, this new generation.
But and another point that you made, which was very, very critical, is the fact that we have these institutions that seem to prefer, in terms of the chart, come in with, like, say they'll write their charter to help urban, inner city, X, Y, and Z. And they'll write that charter and they say they'll start off the first year or the second year with a population of 60% black. But by that second year, you will notice that the population has to like 10% black. Right. So they systematically, they'll say, okay, they can come in, and then they'll systematically not accept anymore. And then all of a sudden, with all of these resources, they're going to some other community, but not to the community that it was designed for. And once again, the same ball game is to make the money off of the backs of the bodies. And that is the same thing. That is slavery. And I don't care what. When they talk about slavery ended in 1865, show me proof that that's happened. Look at the population, education, look at the prison population, and tell me how it's when you say that there are choices when there are no real choices. See, you have to have choices in order to autonomy or freedom or independence. And with those choices already being made and laid out in a plan, and you don't have those choices, that is still slavery. So it's just a modern day application of that. Right. And I think we really have to move towards a direction recognizing we have all the data, we have all the statistics, so we have to recognize the trauma that this has placed on our children, our babies. This is you send a child into that environment where they're not going to receive teacher, they're not going to receive the encouragement of a teacher. They walk into trauma, and there have been studies to prove that a child having that natural instinct or defense mechanism kick in, it affects their processing, it affects how they do mathematics, it affects all of the defense mechanisms that they use. It leaves only small intellect to go ahead and pursue the study or the information that is being imparted. There's studies that prove it. So when we say tough it out, when we say to our children, well, that's the way of the world, then we're failing them. We are failing them, and we can't continue to do that. So we have to look at this data and have our professionals come in, look at the finances. All of our people working for corporations need to look at the finances and take finance back. Resources that were owed to us were never realized. And back when I was in college, they had a thing called when they were running two separate public school systems, which is the normal thing, diverting them, which we've already talked about. In that consent decree, they had to bring Grambling up to the standard of the other schools that had been getting all the resources over the many decades. In doing that, so they gave the money and they started upgrading the facilities. However, the black students didn't get to use it. They brought in white students to a historically black university. The top nursing program students were coming from the neighboring school, and they did not process that the rest of us did. They did not have to interact with students. They came in, were ushered in, got the major lion's share of that endowment, and then the program was basically 80% white and about 20% black on a black college. So when I saw that, of course, we protested this, and we started talking about this is not beneficial the students who it was intended for. But that is the game, and we keep seeing it over and over and over.
Yeah.
Had a similar experience with the board at Howard. You could talk about that one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's another thing. We look at these black colleges, and so at Howard University, on the Southern strategy, when the Southern strategy it's still in effect now. Donald Trump has played the Southern strategy to a T. He's played it perfectly, and the Southern strategy was given a Republican by the name of Atwater, Lee Atwater. Lee Atwater said, because we can't say nigga, nigga, nigga anymore, we have to start saying welfare queen. We have to start saying thugs. We have to use coded words. He was the first to really use that. He got it from his mentor, Storm Thurmond, the racist out of North Carolina. Well, Howard University was going to allow Lee Atwater to sit on the board of trustee at Howard University, because his strategy was, I needed to split the black vote. I need the elite of the black vote just to vote for me. I just need 10% of them. And Howard University's president at that time held a fundraiser for Lee Atwater at the same time that, no matter what we think of him, Jesse Jackson was running for presidency. They held a fundraiser for George Bush. Now, this Lee Atwater was the one who played Willie Horton ad over and over, where it showed a black man being furloughed, and they said he attacked a white woman, and that was make him look like he was friendly toward the black thugs and shift the vote over to Bush. Now, mind you, Bill Clinton would play the same Southern strategy when he would stand outside of Stone Mountain and have black prisoners standing behind him. And Stone Mountain was being the headquarters for the Klan in the South. And he was giving that subliminal message that, don't worry, even though I'm a Democrat, even though these black people love me, I'm gonna be tough on these black people just as these other people were. So yeah, at Harvard University, we saw how this Thurgood Marshall group, once again, feeling like they can get benefits, want to warm up to these hostile elite groups that are hostile toward us, the majority of us. So we have this struggle that we currently see over and over, where we have black administrators who are playing a undermining black children. And this is what you saw during Brown versus the board. What really took place was you had black people, though well educated in segregated schools, they said, if I can only get the guard down, I can get on the other side. And that's really what they say. And we're really saying we want access. Yeah, of course we want access. It's our dollars that are building UCLA's and the Marylands and so forth, these universities. But we shouldn't have to run our institutions to get access to the greater society. We shouldn't have to run off our educators in our hospitals even, because this is not just a question of our schools. You can look down the line. And one thing Tahuti touched upon is the fact that they're actually stealing money from these school boards. They're taking the for the children never see them. They get siphoned away. The contracts that are given to consulting firms, where black children do not see that money, and white consulting firms come in with a promise they're going to turn the school around and so forth, and they're stealing this money. And this is one of the things that we're not looking at. We're so busy just looking at the police violence, which we should be, that we're not looking at the institutional violence and the corruption and the stealing that is going on in our white.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what we're going to do, because we're with you, we see these issues. None of us are exempt. None of our children are exempt. We are experiencing this every single day. And this is a large load to carry. We can lighten our weight to understand the things that are transpiring, so that our children are not dealing with this, so that our teachers are not dealing with this. We've got to make some change, and it's going to have to be that we cause that change to transpire. So we're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about how we can make that change. We're going to talk more about Sundiata is going to come back, and then we're going to switch off to Hootie. But you're burning it up, brothers. You're burning it up. This is what we need to know. Thank you for educating us here at Unplugged News. We love you. So we'll be back in just a moment.
Unplugged News.
Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
I Unplugged News. I Unplugged News.
Where you get our cultural news. I Unplugged News is coming to you in
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
All over the world.
I Unplugged News,
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
I Unplugged News. I Unplugged News.
Where you get our cultural news. I Unplugged News is coming to you in
I Unplugged News.
where you get our cultural news.
All over the world.
Excuse me, welcome back to Clubhouse and I Unplugged News. That's when you got a lot going on. We have our brother Jehudi on, and we have our dear brother Sundiata on. They are here to educate us. We've been talking about the Brown versus the Board of Education case and what that case has done uh, to de-establish our people. You know, people look at that term anti-disestablishmentarianism, as just a political term, but I think we can apply the de-establishment of our community, the takedown, the purpose of what they're doing in our schools, the purpose of what they're doing in our communities, the purpose of what they're doing to our precious children. They are taking their education away. They're
Yes.
taking our funding away, our economics away from us. So we're going to talk more about that. I know, Sundiata, you were talking a lot about the battle around the country, and Jehudi, you talked about control of the black mind and how uh, you know, our black students are being targeted. Our children are being targeted. We talked about, some of the ways that they're being targeted, and some other ways are, tracking, testing, drugging. I think you bring the point. I've heard you say before, special education, black on black crime. Sundiata was just talking about. So, with where we are in this conversation, in this interview, you know, talk to us about exactly what framework you see that we're both entertaining, whether it be by ignorance and miseducation, or whether it be because this has become a cultivated way of life, but it wasn't cultivated by us. And we need to understand that we're maintaining a way of life that we don't have to. We don't have to maintain this way of
That's right.
life. We are free thinking people, and so if you can come to us in that way, talk to us about that. Talk to us about taking back our schools. What is it going to take? You talked a little bit about what we gave up, but how do we get back what we
That's a great
gave
question.
up?
That's a great question. I think I'm gonna give Tahuti the floor because one of the things that Tahuti has been doing for 20 years is single-handedly fighting what's going on in Inglewood. It's one of the blackest districts in the state. He informed me. I didn't know that. It's one of the blackest California. It's the last holdout that we have. I mentioned earlier that my parents started in Compton. That was black, but because of the demographics change, most of the cities around Los Angeles and in California, we're having a struggle in terms of our stronghold on these districts. Well, Tahuti's been in Inglewood, and he grew up in Inglewood. He was educated in Inglewood, and now he's teaching in Inglewood, and he's fighting this onslaught of these black educators and administrators who are putting upon him and really trying to attack him and the struggle he has just bringing other educators to really fight is amazing because psychologically we are such a position that many of us are even voice our opinion even when they're attacking us. So Tahuti's been fighting them and they've been fighting him so forth. Really, he's gone to the mat for them. Tahuti, just give him a brief history on just your personal battle and then what you've done for the.
Well, there's a saying if they don't attack you, you're really not making, you're not making a difference. Or you, and basically, I just look at the need for us to exercise authority over the decision of our people, our children. And in a public school setting, you have to go. I've been at board meetings for over 20, 22 years, pointing out the discrepancies, pointing out the funding issues, pointing out the
Straight out lies.
the lack of addressing the lies and all of this stuff. They're not addressing the needs of our students. And so a lot of times the conditioning through after 400 plus years of assault puts us in a position we don't even know what normalcy looks like. We don't bit of governance. We have a feeling among us that corruption is corrupt, and that's a problem. So when a person stands up like in the district that we're talking about, Inglewood Unified, for years and years and years, resources have been siphoned away our students and what they need. They take the programs up. They take investments out, the things that help our students when you're dealing with right brain balance, and when you're dealing with music, art, and when you're dealing with children exam, the type of learning, the style of learning that our children excel at, that they take those out. And if you look across the country, I'll use Inglewood, but across the country, you'll find this in all of these areas. You find the same program, the same platform. These charter consolidation of black people, black students. You have a little people moved here, a little group here, but not that solid school where you can go back to it and draw from. You come back and you see your teacher that's been there for 20 years. No, that's not there anymore. You come back and you see tradition of excellence. That's not there anymore. Everything is isolated and like a like this COVID situation. I'll just use that as an example. They're keeping us in separation and isolation so that we can't come together and as a collective. And I think that we have to get into these policy board meetings, and our children are still in public school. We have to challenge uh, the villainization of our students and over suspensions of our students. We have to challenge them, tracking them and over prescribing them to special education. We have to challenge the drugs. When we talked about prison to school to prison pipeline, but there's a school to mental issues pipeline, school to foster care pipeline. There's all kind of that lead to abuse, and we have to stop abusing our children through resource rape, through all of these things that is occurring in front of our eyes, and we're silent. You know, comes a time, I think Martin Luther King said, when silence is betrayal. So, you know, I'm the type that you can't ever silence me. You know, we're going to talk about it,
That's right.
whether they like it or not.
That's right.
And no matter what they do, no matter what threats, whatever they try, nothing that's going to silence it, because it's right is right, and you have to continue to strive for what's right. Community to organize. We're so isolated and disorganized. They cannot feel the power of our being. You know, we have a power, but it's so diverted and diluted, and they keep us isolated and separated that they exploit us. And so when we come together, we have to come together in force at these meetings. We have to write these legislators. We have to demand the resources that we're entitled. We can show the statistics how they've denied us. And we can show that they have never made a program specifically tailored to the cultural, um, academic, and linguistic needs for our children. That is never. And so until we start demanding that, when they can do it for other groups, they definitely should be doing it for us. In fact, we are the reason public education is in this country. We are the ones that drove it. We're the ones that pushed for it. If we go back into the history, they have where they said that the small white farmers and the so-called ex-slaves were placed talking about what they wanted. Small white farmers were indifferent. They weren't into it at all. Where ex-slaves said, give us more taxes if you can't give us our resources. So there's no questions that are about our community is there. What we miss is leaders that's not corrupt. We miss analysis of what policies and what a contract and what resources need to be at that school and demand it. Like we talked about ADA, the money that's made off of right here, California is now 49 out of 50 in terms of education. I used to know the spending amount, but it's
I
pretty
know
far down as well.
where I am currently in Ohio,
Hmm.
it's 3,600 some odd dollars
Per
per
student.
child per child.
Yeah.
You know that, and I mean, and
It's actually low.
you hear the teachers say that, you know, the schools say that they can't provide supplies for the children even because, you know, they've got to pay bills. You know, well, I mean, it doesn't cost that much. You
Yeah.
No.
know, like
And give them more
you
money.
got to be misallocating funds.
Yeah.
Well,
Give
And
them
yeah,
we've
more
and
been
see,
money.
looking at this for a long time, staring it right in the face as though it's not actually happening. And we as a community need to understand that we must obligate ourselves to the charge of handling these things. We bring people like, you know, Brother Sundiata and Brother Tahuti on I Am Plug News so that we can ensure that people know about what's going on.
Right.
Once people know about what's going on, and we're not going to stop talking about it, we're going to bring, you know, Brother Jehudi and Brother Sundiata on as many times as we need to make sure that we seal the deal with our own community. It's
Right.
time to get up. Okay, now that you're awake, now that the sleep is out of your eyes, get up and let's go. We have stuff to do.
Right.
And so I thank you all for doing this. I thank you
yeah.
for expressing the necessitation that we must embody within the community so that we can make the change for our children, for our community, for our elders. You know, we've got to, for generations to come, we've
Right.
got to get on the ball. So we
Right.
at I Unplugged, we are going to set up a special initiative. And we're going to confer with Brother Tahuti and Brother Sundiata consistently so that we can get some people in place. Where I am here in Columbus and in New York, we're getting ready to spearhead this. We're going to combine forces with you because there's strength in numbers.
Right.
So we've got to pay attention. We
Right.
need to be listening. So, Brother Jehudi, keep going. You were talking about the needs that we have, and the last that you said is analysis, the
Right.
analytics to deal with what we're dealing with. So we may need to develop new analytic systems for areas that we don't already have statistics for.
Right. And we have to hold these organizations accountable as well. National organizations like to focus on a lot of should be the number one thing, in my opinion, of all of our issues because it as we we alluded to earlier, it affects the entire community and the entire economy. And if we go locally, and then have a national, we need to develop a national plan. And that means wherever our students are in whatever city circumstance, if it's one or if it's a million, that we have some in place to ensure that they're protected. The fact that we just got had this divorce as a education secretary. I mean, we should have been in the streets about that. We should have
Yes.
been in the streets, about the funding or the slap in the face, talking about the HBCU funding, which is nothing more than a of what was already in place to make appear like that how really making an impact on the students' access. So
Right.
when we talk about um, accountability, we have to make ourselves accountable. We have to be involved. And I think our no matter how tired, you look at our generations before, you don't think they were tired, working
Right.
sun up to sundown, you don't think they were tired. So,
Right.
we all are tired, but this is a must,
Right.
because we're talking about generational theft.
Right.
I in the book, I believe it was the Black Tax, was like something like $22 trillion extracted that we should have access to currently. And this is a continuous process. We're talking 4 trillion of buying power, quote unquote, that we have annually. That's nothing to the amount of money that has been stripped and stolen just on labor. There was A. Philip Randolph, who was the Pullman Port labor leader. He said, "You get your ideas from where you get your funding."
That's right.
And I say that we schools, but we shouldn't have to with the monies that we've already contributed. That's our dollars. And those are our tax dollars. And we have to look at that and say, well, we want control over spent. It's just that plain and simple. And if we do that, I'm sure we're going to do the right thing for our own children. However, we keep cowing down or cowarding to these forces as if we don't have the power to combat them. If anybody has the power, we've proven that over time. We just have to be involved. And
Right. The 1968, the Ocean Hill
oh yeah,
Brownsville situation, the community control, the battle for community control. If you really want to see, at a brief period, we pull the covers off of this system, and we were able to see truly who they were. And this point in time, 1968, the Ocean Hill Brownsville situation, where you had black parents were given an opportunity for community control. So, see, the game is this: they fail our children, and then they blame our parents for failing our children. They fail our children, and then they blame our community for failing our children. They fail our children, they blame the children themselves for being failed. So, at this point in time, they said, okay, we'll do this. We'll give you school and we'll let you all do something. Let's see if you come up with different results. Well, the first thing the parents did was fire those teachers, mainly white and Jewish, who were sitting in the classroom and not teaching the children. They fired them. They got rid of them. It was 19 of them. They took them out. There was no Jewish children in the school. Jewish teachers who were not doing their job, white teachers who were not doing their job inside the classroom. And those students in 1968 Ocean situation where those parents came in and said, we want young, progressive, African-centered teachers coming in. Those teachers came in and started teaching true history to the children, start wearing African attire to the classroom. They gave a new feeling, a new sense of purpose and empowerment in the classroom. What happened was those 19 white Jewish teachers went outside the classroom and started picketing. Not only did they picket, though, they started painting the argument as though this was an anti-Semitic movement. They created the argument that they were the victims. They created the argument that black people were being racist. Listen closely. This is what they do to us. Whenever we start talking about being inclusive, they always put the label on us. Oh, you're being. Oh, you're not. You're not for the human family. Meanwhile, if you followed them home, I bet you none of their children have black teachers in front of them. You can't take a school with 85% white children or white female children at that and put 100% black teachers in front of them. Imagine that scenario. Imagine a school with white children in it, and imagine the teachers and administrators all being black males. They would not go for that. That is not found anywhere in the United States at all. So here we had Ocean Hill, Brownsville situation where the Rockefeller Foundation, this is very important. This is very important when you start considering charter schools, because what they did was they started using the argument. So this was called community control. Same label that they would later put on charter schools. It was called community control. They allowed the community to have control of their school. And when they didn't like what they were doing, they pulled it from them, only to wait 10, 15 years later and give them their version of community control. Their version of community control was foundations, once again, going right back into 1865, 1866, 1877, when we had these philanthropists who were coming and saying, we'll educate you. Don't educate yourself. We're going to educate you. So there's brief periods in history when you can see what the system really wants to do. And Ocean Hill, Brownsville is that time, because at that moment, Earl, our brother Earl, who was our Jegna, was there at that moment. He saw where the police came on campus. The fire department came on these campuses. You're talking about 19 white Jewish teachers, the institutions in New York turning their full force against the black parents, stopping them from improving their schools, saying that you better let us in, let us fail your children. And their argument was that it was against their constitutional right to kick them out of the schools, that they had the legal right to be in front of. But they got away with it. But we have to study that to understand the arguments that are going to come before us when we start trying to move this ball forward to its proper perspective. Because too many times, even black people are blaming our children for not learning when it's the most asinine thing that you want to hear in your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is as indicative of the misallocation of funds,
Right.
the misallocation of usage of power. It is as indicative because, it is the misallocation of blame. Blame should be placed on who is guilty. And
Right.
our children don't need that, not to mention they're not guilty. They are innocent.
Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, yes, I mean, whether we're talking about Topeka, whether we're talking about PS 201 in New
Right.
York, whether we're
Right.
talking about, it's going on everywhere, but we need to
Everywhere.
focus in, even though you heard Brother Jehudi talk about how uh, we need this independent aspect as far as the fight, but we really have to understand that as a whole, no matter where this is happening in the country, because it's happening everywhere in the country where we are populated heavily, and so where this is happening, we have an obligation to now combine forces with Yehudi. This is how you make your effort singular versus having 10,000 different agendas. You have one agenda and you attack each city, each
Right.
school, each district. You attack there. So what I want to do is rally people together with the agenda concerning Inglewood. Okay, I would really love for you and Brother Sundiata to talk more about exactly what's happening in Inglewood, how it has affected the community. I know we're going to have a part two next week. So that's a wonderful thing, because we'll be able to kind of add into the details. But because we're getting, close to the end of our time here on I Unplugged, and this was a special edition, so we went longer than what we normally do. But we're coming to a close. Can you please just tap it straight for us? And then also, before you do that, do you have, is there a specific place that people can go to? Is there a website, or is there a telephone number? Is there an organization that if people want to come together and we want to rally our support to get behind you, where can we send our monies to get behind you? Where can we send, if you need letters written, or if you need, more people, if you need some people, maybe we know some people in California, we can say, get your tail down there. What are you doing? So whatever we need to do to get behind you, we need to figure this out. If you're going to deal with a greater effort, with us being combined, we want to make sure we're dealing with a greater effort with you being the head of that. Because this mission is a serious mission, and it's not meant for one man or two men or five men or 200 men to stand alone. We've got to get behind our brothers. So talk to us.
Well, as far as that information, I'll be able to give that to you next week. I do have a organization called We Are Free, and free stands for the fighters for the right to education. I'll be able to give you that information next week. But as far as just to give a to what we're facing, we successfully fought the closing of the last predominantly African student populated school in Inglewood last year, as they had already voted to close it, and they ended up rescinding it because of the pressure that we brought. However, that is the wealth that's surrounding Inglewood. Inglewood has a brand new $4 billion SoFi Stadium for the Rams, owned by a man by the name of Kroenke, who is a billionaire, and he's connected with Walmart heirs. So they have all kind of money, able to divert their tax burdens for like 10 years, nothing designed for the schools to lift the schools up. But then they asked the taxpayers for $240 million bond to upgrade the schools that they had let be dilapidated over time and unaddressed. So the taxpayers have the burden, but the billionaire who for $40 million a year alone in taxes got a 10-year furlough for that, as well as the Clipper owner is building a stadium in Inglewood as well. Again, he time amount of about 100. He's Microsoft Balmer. But none of that money is earmarked for the schools. So we said that there should be a demand for that money to go to the schools and for local control to be returned. Now, what they did, they systematically find district of cash, and in order for the school district to by the state of California receivership. So that takes away the local control, that takes away the board, that takes away the authority to make the decisions. And that's the current state. And it's been in that state since 2012, which is the longest in the history of the state. Now, there's no reason with all that money around that that situation can't be um, um, overcome, especially for a loan that's simply $29 million, and that's within there. They can write a check for that amount and return local, autonomy. However, you have the building there as well. So all it's a billions of dollars around Inglewood, but our children are not going to receive the benefit of them, because when they build these schools, they're going to systematically, and I've been writing, eliminate our children from the benefit. So I'll be able to get you that information. We do have a Facebook page. It's under that same acronym, We Are Free. And there's a couple of other emails that I'll be able to send to you.
Okay. And until that point, feel free to contact Unplugged News. You can actually go on to iUnplugged.com, our website, to find information about what we're doing. We'll post something on Unplugged News, on the Unplugged News page within the Unplugged website, which is www.iunplugged.com. Again, that's www.iunplugged.com. You can also dial 614-260-6553. That's 614-260-6553. Also, there is an Unplugged News telephone number there on the website. It's a 380 area code for Unplugged News. We'll get you that number in just a moment. So, in terms of what we're dealing with now, this is to the audience. We have a lot of work to do and a short time to do it in. We've been given uh, we've been given the information, and we can see how this thing sunk so fast. But if we are deliberate in our efforts uh, concerning, saving our children, saving our schools, saving our black teachers, and saving our black community as a whole, because next week they're gonna return, and we're gonna talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Inglewood and how it has affected, this very thing has affected the entire community so horribly bad. It's just, you wouldn't believe as to how it has completely affected the entire community everywhere you look. You don't even have to know what's going on. As soon as you drive into Inglewood, you can see it on the faces of the neighborhood. So we're going to talk about that next week. I'm going to tell you something. Sundiata, I just really thank you. It was Sundiata who introduced me to Tahuti. And Tahuti, I really want to thank you for coming. This has been a real eye opener for myself and the I Unplugged family. Um, this has been a reality that, hanging in the balance is just not a good space. We need to be effective, and we need to be affecting. And so we're going to put together some things, and we'll kind of confer with you and tell you what we want to do, and you kind of tell us, gear us to what you believe about what we want to do, but we want to get behind you. Do you have any place that if somebody wants to even, donate some money towards the cause and the work that you're doing, is there a Cash App or PayPal or anything that you have?
No, we don't have that currently, but if that's an area that you probably could assist us in. We're in
We
the
sure can.
process of organizing with a couple of other organizations as well. We had a very productive meeting 2 days ago. We're moving towards it's really, everybody recognized this in these
Sure.
issue, and they want to be involved and they want to help. So yeah, that'll be coming.
All right. All right. And with that being said, and I'm sure that this week we'll be able to get more information. If you'd like to donate, if you want to Cash App, uh, dollar sign, S as in Sam, the word I, which is spelled EYE. That would be a capital EYE and then another capital EYE. If you put in the note, the memo line, that you'd like for it to go, if you just put in uh, Brown versus Board, uh, Brown v. Board, um, then we'll get those monies over to Hootie so that he can continue the work within the community. This movement is important. We've got to save our children. If we can't think about anything else, we've got to have our mind on our youth because this is a crying shame,
I
and
think I just
it's
want to
not.
say, I think I
Say
speak
again.
for Tui when we say also we want Unplugged News to be supported, because really, the community support, spreading the news, this is so powerful that I think in the long run, just getting something a strong, independent voice out there is very important. So, you don't worry about us financially as of yet. But we do want the physical support of the along to other teachers that physical education. Talk about Inglewood, California. We want to start connecting more than anything. And if you have any resources, which we should have laying around the house, let's put it to an unplugged news so that we can have strong, independent voices. So we have to go through the Don Lemons and all of those who we know are in the pockets of other people. So we want to really just say that we rather have any kind of financial support be put into unplugged news, and so that
That's
we
right.
can get this out and we can get the Midwest taken care of and the East Coast taken care of, and we can do what we did back in the '60s and the '50s and the '40s, have community involvement in terms of our struggle and our activism, because we're going to win if we just stick
Yes,
together. Tootie said it. One thing Tahuti did not say, I'm gonna say it again. Tahuti has single-handedly led the fight for black children in Inglewood when other black teachers were afraid. Tahuti has withstood the. I've been to the school board meetings when they've seen Tahuti and they wanted to silence him and they wanted to put a gag order on him and they wanted to just drag him out like they did our brother in Chicago. During
Bobby
during the
Seale.
Democratic. Yeah, about Bobby Seale. I've been there. They truly hate him. They're you do not understand. Next week he's going to get into it. I'll make sure he gets into just how they break the law trying to go after one person in Inglewood who's standing between them and takeovers of the school. And I'm just going to give this as an anecdote. Tootie had a rally in the park, and it was the most beautiful thing. An elderly couple came up, and they said it's a shame what they're doing to your school, because that school was actually used as a example of how we were doing well before integration, because that school was one of the top schools in California that they're trying now to close. And it's Tahuti that goes up against the white principal who they bring in and say, you don't belong here. You need to go home. So these are the kind of things that he's doing. Next week he's going to get. I'll make sure that he gets in more of it because he's being humble, and we'll make sure that he really shows the scars that he's taken as being our Disselaney when it comes to this movement in Inglewood. So any funds anyone has, we wanted to go to Unplugged News so we can build up our voice across the country. So that's what I'm going to say. And
Oh well, we just are so thankful that you came, because this is the stuff here that you rebuild with. This is what you rebuild with. You strengthen what remains, and we got two kings in our presence. And Brother Jehudi, you're going to be undergirded. We're going to undergird you. And so you all heard, you heard Brother Sundiata. Uh, the plot thickens. So next week we're going to talk about uh, Brown versus Wade, Inglewood, and how the plot thickens. And so next week we'll be on our regular time. I Unplugged News at 7:30 p.m. And we are going to duke it out next week. So we look forward to seeing you, Tahuti and Sundiata. We just want to thank you again. If you'll stay on with me once we're off of the program, there's a couple of things I want to make sure that I get from you. so that we can send you out some things from I Unplugged News. We just are so glad that you're here with us today, and it's such an honor and a privilege to be in your presence. Thank you for educating your mind and for educating our community. Uh, so, with
Thank
that
you,
being,
sister.
Thank you.
Thank
oh,
you
you're
for all you
welcome.
do. I just want to close with a quote that I always close with from Brother Malcolm, who says, Education is our passport to the future. Belongs to those who prepare for it today. So we got to prepare for our tomorrow.
All right, there you
That's my
go.
mouse pad.
All
That's
right
my
now.
All
mouse
right.
pad. Yes, we must prepare. Absolutely. We must prepare today for our tomorrow. So our children are where it all is. So it doesn't get any deeper than that, y'all. Again, this has been I Unplugged News with Shelly I, your host, and we have Brother Tahuti and Sundiata that we are going to sign off with. And I just want to salute you, brothers, again. Thank you, and you have a wonderful rest of the evening. All right, I am plugged on Clubhouse. We just want to thank you for being here with us. We're going to have a discussion, a brief discussion, just a little bit as we uh, get off of the platform of I Unplugged News. We want to talk to you a little bit more. So if you'll stay on Clubhouse with us, then we'll be able to do that. If you just give us a few minutes, thank you so much.